Eventually.
We'll go ahead and do Midnight Silverado.
All right, go ahead.
All right, we're gonna switch it up. We're gonna do Midnight Silverado.
He's gonna do it. Wherever, John.
95 down the highway, mud tires wide, DJ blasting out, speakers in the radio. I turn off a dirt road, roll back one more. Might not be legal, but I got some place to go. Back to the woods that ain't never been found, shotgun out the window. Living life from a song as the dust out dries behind some no-name back road. Jump on into the Chevy with the moonlight dancing through the windows. Take a ride through time as you roll on the wheels of that midnight Silverado. Let go. Trip to the bottom of a 750, let your mind flow with that bootleg whiskey. It ain't the past, the future, it's about right now. Shaking hands with the clock and make time slow down. Story ain't made with pen and paper. The house ain't built with steel and stones. Taking hold of life, you never let go. With the blood on your knuckles to get back home. Back to the woods that ain't never been found. Shotgun out the window. Live a line from a song as the dust about dries behind some no-name back road. Jump on in to the Chevy with the moonlight dancing through the windows. Take a ride through time as you roll on the wheels of that midnight Silverado. Let go. Still know the feeling when your lips land on mine. I still go back to the settle that fall October night. Don't know what does it, but it sure feels right. Every time that song comes on, I jump into that midnight Silverado and take a ride back to the woods that ain't never been found. Shotgun out the window, live a life from a song as the dust cloud dries behind some no-name back road. Jump on in to the Chevy with the moonlight dancing through the windows. Take a ride through time as you roll on the wheels of that midnight Silverado. Let go. Midnight Silverado. Midnight Silverado.
We'll call it quits right now. We'll call you back later.
Sounds good.
Okay. Order for John. Sure. Okay.
Let's throw a little couple of
Well, we always like history lessons. This is a place that Bill Kloefkorn and a lot of the other retired reprobates from Wesleyan University would come congregate on Wednesday, usually around noon, and tell stories. Imagine that. And so those stories have soaked in the walls for years, and they ooze out at the most interesting moments. So with that, and the fact that the last time I saw Don was in a coffee shop south of campus in Kearney with a lot of his cronies and friends and so forth, and Ed Stevens is a guy that stops in once in a while there. So we start with those memories, and we move on to the fact that both Eloise and Marcia are here, families here, kids, grandkids, people that almost claim to be cousins, some that say they aren't cousins. I'm not sure how that works. But we're all cousins and we're all family tonight, and this is the kind of community that we want to have with writing. It's a whole community. It's soft edges, warm feelings, good poetry, and good times. So with that, I'm going to bring up Ed Stevens. He's going to start the night. He's a friend of mine through Don, through the bookstore that he and Diane ran for a number of years out on Main Street in Kearney, Bookends, one of my favorite places. Amy Pletner and I read there one time, and we went out a couple more times to hear other people read, among them Dwayne Speaker and some other folks like that. So that was always a great occasion. So with that, we will have Ed come up and tell us a few stories and maybe read a poem or two, and that will get the evening going. So do remember, this is a wonderful place. Paul Marshall is our host. Mojave is mostly all his handiwork. I think all the sanding and painting and electrical, etc., and this whole renovation was Paul over a matter of a year and a half or so. He has a great staff. Be sure and tip them well, and be sure and buy a few things to eat, and don't forget to come back here once in a while. This is a great spot for this part of Unite Place and Nebraska. Ed Stevens.
I'm going to get it yet, aren't I? I got it last time.
Thank you, Rex,
I'm good.
and thanks for having this. Thanks to Mojave for providing a place for where we can celebrate two of Nebraska's very, very finest. I never had the privilege of knowing Bill Kloefkorn, but I know his work really well, and I'm proud to be in a place where he even walked through, much less read. We're glad to be here. I did have coffee with Don Lott in the coffee shop that Rex spoke of, and you may not be able to see him real clearly, but he's here tonight in a lot of different ways, in his poetry and in his blood and in all of our hearts. I'm going to read some of Don's poetry that probably isn't as well known. I've told this story before, but when I was a young man, we come from the same part of the world, Don and I, up in Custer County, and I always liked poetry. But in my part of the world, you didn't admit, if you were male, to liking poetry. And so I was sort of a closet, poetry guy for a long time, and then I finally got old enough to where I didn't care any longer. But I always assumed that there had been no good poetry written since about Wordsworth. I was a classicist, Keats and Yeats and those guys. And then one day in about 1976, I picked up this book. And I realized right away that I'd been wrong all that time, that there were some really good writers working, and this was one of the very best. This is Don's first book, I believe I'm right. Marcia, is that right? And to me, it's one of his best. I want to read the title poem out of it. If you know the high clay tablelands of northern and central Custer County, this will resonate a lot better with you. It's called, does everybody here know what a table is in terms of topography? It's in Arizona, they call them mesas. Out here, they're just big, tall, flat-topped hills that we call tables. This is called Dead Horse Table. Nobody's born on Dead Horse Table, and fewer stay. Hawks long ago gave up flying straight lines here, and those that could flew away and fell into valleys. By day we are hard specters of ourselves. By night we are our looped throat syllables. We greet passers-by with one finger raised from our steering wheel. We lock our hubs. Mailman, we say, rides side saddle But when they come, we blow membranes from our noses and sit down with catalogs. And if it rains when we're reading Sears, the pink skin of our half hands or stumped arms blooms. Our women are to spatulas as wands. Only dunces would think we have long, slim roots, white to our length. We're more like beets whose leaves club each other for reservoirs of air. What's under us is something so red and huge, it makes hard sockets in the land. The stones around us grow pale. Dirt both stays and flees. But dreams know us as the most succulent moments they can swim into on their way from deep Edens to the local well company. That's why dreams eat us with their biggest molars. Bearing their squat power, they squash our equators, which rise like exploded hugs to meet tooth's corrugated urge. Otherwise, Our Lady of Succor Church is the only relief on Dead Horse Table. It gleams at the corner of two roads, one alkali, one gravel. This book has a poem in it that still just knocks me out. The poem is too long and too rich to read out loud. You have to have it in front of you so you can take a couple of days to go through it. I'm not going to read the whole thing because about 80% of it would be lost. It's 4.5, almost 5 pages of gleaming little jewel couplets. They're just wonderful things. Each can stand on their own, but you string them all together and they tell this wonderful, wonderful story. These little couplets, I call them, they're like prairie haiku, you know, wonderful stuff. I want to read you 3 or 4 of them. This poem is called Stealing Apples. For heaven's sake, get a hold of this book and read it if you haven't. It's just great. One of the characters in the poem is a kid named Schwarnweber, who is a little bit of a klutz and a dunce, I think. Anyway, we'll start where it says, the boys in the Big Onion across the street had come to the window with blats on it and are watching Schwarnweber's mouth, which is saying, Jesus Christ, you dumb little lip-stroy kid, if you don't stop it, I'm going to rub your nose in what your sister does at the next band concert. I wish I could read the whole thing, but I can't. It's a great poem called Stealing Apples. My favorite Don Welch collection has always been this, alley poems. I've lived in Kearney for more than 50 years now, and if you're a Kearneyite, everything in here resonates. Down on South Central, across the tracks about 2 or 3 blocks, there's a place called the Worley Monument Company. They sell tombstones. They've been there for as long as I can remember. And I don't know how many of you know the story about the alley poems, but for a couple of years, a few years ago, Don did nothing but go out and walk the alleys of primarily South Kearney and would bring home a poem or two from those sojourns. And one of those alleys led him behind the Worley Monument Company in an alley. This poem is called Behind the Monument Company. An angel, one wing gone, lies on its side. There are no pupils in its eyes. What it's always stood for, I love this, what it's always stood for is dead reckoning. On the stump of its wing, a cat is making a warm poultice in the sun. Above them, the windows are plaques of dust. The cat soothes the angel with no fuss. Another alley poem. This has an epigram. I presume it's from Don. It doesn't really say. It says, an alley is a dump of bits and pieces connected by an air of disregard. Isn't it great? The poem is called Cinders and Hollyhocks. No, an alley's still a poor kid's way to wealth. No hopes are ever quite so crushed as rocks. No black-eyed Susans unable to seed themselves in smashed down fences. It takes the sun and an innocent angle of the mind to make coal gleam, and the discovery of old hex bolts can weld minutes into moments. In an alley, no dead cat dies for those who cannot touch it. No garbage man grows familiar to chained dogs. And even girls with deep bruises on their cheeks can curl hollyhocks between their fingers and their thumbs, spinning them into rose-hued ballerinas. In alleys, every morning's china, the chow with the purple tongue. These next two poems, I'd like to read one by Bill Kloefkorn and then finish up with a short one from Don. And I like both of these poems, I suspect, because both Don and Bill are of my vintage. We're old guys, we're geezers.
Old guy superhero.
And these last two poems speak to that in a way that's important to me. I hope it is to you. This is my favorite Kloefkorn poem. It's called New Year's Eve. 2 small jelly jars, each half filled with prune juice. We lift them slowly, ceremoniously. Here's looking up your old neighborhood, I say softly. My wife nods. We clank glasses. From where I'm sitting at the old oak table, I can see through a window a vast diorama of bleakness. Bleakness so comprehensive, so indiscriminate, it's lovely. It's lovely, I say. The woman I love smiles, says I love you too. We swirl the deep purple juice, then pause to inhale and admire its presumption. We agree, nectar fit for the gods. Later, around dusk, we will walk the rooms from one diorama to another to observe the nuances of bleakness, how they define the curious offspring of fertility. Many of whom, let's guess more than 1 million, will be gathered in Times Square around midnight to celebrate the concept of newness. Oh, how sweet it is to have lived long enough not to be younger. Is that great? Even so, when the height of the occasion is reached, we place lampshades on our heads and glowing, slow dance like the mysteries we are in the darkness. And finally, Don didn't talk, at least to me, much about getting older, end of life, those kinds of things. We always had other kinds of things to say to each other. But I have been reading this poem for about 15 years, and every day I get older, it's a better poem. It's called At the Last Intersection. Walk, let it out again, be passed on, a baton for barking dogs or silent, tickled by foxtail, fluffed up, quiet. Past the shadow of your shadows, past the hammered world where everything's a bent up love. Hang true, be plumb, dropping from your crossbeams through your breast. And this is important. If you must intersect with something, try the sun. Eye level, on the bubble, walk, don't run. Thank you.
The idea is to be familiar with a poem in that regard, to read something that you love on an irregular basis, which is probably appropriate for poets. Irregular basis is good for old people too. We do things like that. We're becoming more natural in our bodies in that regard too. Thank you, Ed. Next we have Don Welch's daughter, Kale, is going to read us a few things. Is she here today? No, she's not here. I saw you out there. Let's welcome her as our friend and our family.
Full disclosure, I have never read in front of an audience older than 11. And if you think I'm giving you the stink eye, it's just because I'm employing my emotion control mechanism. Don't take it personally. When I asked Rex if I could read, he said, sure. Why don't you read 3 or 4 poems? And I said, okay, that narrows it down. And some of you who know me and who are friends with me on Facebook know that since my dad passed, I've been taking his aphorisms and putting a picture with them and putting them on Facebook every day. And so he and I have been spending a lot of time together, and so the day that Rex emailed me back and said, sure, I'd like you to read, the aphorism that day was, always leave your children a few good poems to grow up to. And if you teach, have an eye for ordinary miracles. And I thought, oh, I know what I'm going to read. I am not a poet, I am not a writer, but over the years I think I've become a pretty good reader, thanks to my dad. And he taught me that the best poems and the best literature are both personal and universal. Those are my words, not his. They mean something to you personally, but they have greater, broader meaning that's timeless, that can be applied universally. So these are poems that he literally wrote for his children and grandchildren for us to grow up to. The first one is called The Smallest Daughter, and that's me. I am daughter number 4, and this was originally published in 1986 in The Keeper of the Miniature Deer. Smallest daughter. The way things go empty, window by window. Upstairs, she changes herself. She draws herself from her dress, letting her hair fall, turning back to her bed. Then she steps from the window into a different world. She moves into a sleep so deep there is nothing to remember, nothing at all. All night, time swims in her room like a swan. In silence now, smaller than thought and softer now, close to dawn, so close to birdsong. And immediately, since I've been spending so much time in these, I thought of his quote, "In the morning our dreams creep back into the eaves, a shadow at a time." The next poem, I'm very excited to say, was first published on my daughter's wall in 2015. So this is called The Talk, and it came as a result after a very disappointing loss at a state softball game. And is hanging on my daughter Zara's wall with a great picture of my dad with his arm around my kiddo. She's 16 now. She must have been, what, 14 years old. It's called The Talk for Zara. Granddaughter, plays never perfect in softball. Rarely does a swing ring, but when it does, a bat loses the tin of itself, the wind of itself, and its barrels full of sing. When it does, the clouds are swept from home plate. The splinters turn nice in their bench, and every bulb in the scoreboard's full on. But because it happens infrequently, it makes us keep swinging. Granddaughter, the good ones are made more than born. And of course, that made me think of our favorite quote, "The easy is what we dream of, the hard is what defines us." The last poem I'd like to read is another poem that he wrote for my oldest daughter. It's called A Letter to Anya, 2 months old, in Islamabad. She's very proud because this has been published in 3 books. First in Fire's Tongue and the Candle's End in 1996, and then again in Times of Considerable Wars in 2013, and in the anthology. This is a poem I think we can all grow up to. Throughout the world, wishes shrivel on cold stones or dry and crack like disembodied blood. Fanatics, especially those with blunt tongue tones, will never love you the way that universal well, that source of love, can love you. Know then there are a few who bring this love like water up, who drink and are made whole. This is a love which will ask you to walk naked through the world with nakedness your shield. And long before you understand the heart of its great mystery, it will crucify you. If those who know nothing of its inner strength believe you weak, show them how love bends iron to its gracious will, or throws itself at storms which try to unbone it. In the fury of this world, there is no stronger verb than love. It is the root which lives through drought. Anya, my small noun, may it find you out. So, have to end with a quote and a thought. In a world where the real always defeats the ideal, it is better to have a good heart than a big head. And so this chapbook that he put his aphorisms in at the very end at the back, and this is for you poets. This was published in 1996. Nebraska has been a good place to write in and from. When nobility and love return to American poetry in the 21st century, as I hope they will, some of the best poems by Nebraskans will be there waiting.
I'm very proud of you, dear. That was marvelous. Marvelous. Your dad was having a great time all the way through that, and still, you know, we'll keep going. Well, we have another fellow here tonight. It just happened to be happenstance that he would be passing through town, going somewhere else, and he said, you know, this is going to work out just right for me. So Dwayne sent me a note, said I can be there and read a couple poems and talk about maybe some of the things that went on putting together that big collection of Don Welch's that you have in your hand, homing. Dwayne, speaker.
Many times in the last year, I've wished I could sit down and knock out another email to Dr. Welch, as I did for about 20 years, but never more than actually this morning. I don't know if any of you still read an old-fashioned newspaper. Maybe a lot of you in this room do, but the Omaha paper, in the version that I got this morning, the sports section had an article about a book of poetry. I kid you not. I shit you not. That is the absolute truth. I could not believe that that was true. Terry Pettit, who used to coach the volleyball team, has an MA in creative writing, and he just self-published a book of poetry. And so I'm reading this book about, you know, poetry about fly fishing and that kind of stuff in the sports section of the Omaha paper. Fell over dead, right? I just could not believe it. So that would be the kind of thing that would encourage me to sit down and knock out a quick email. That would have been a phone call. I would have called him about that. I hope I beat him to the punch. Hope the Omaha paper got to Wayne before it did Kearney. But anyway, a lot of you in the room I'm sure don't know me. My name is Dwayne Speaker, and I had the privilege of being a senior at UNK when the year Don retired. The first time, and a few of my friends and I fell into, you know, a fan club, you might say, of Dr. Welch. And so through a series of events, I can only credit email and dumb luck I stayed in touch with Don for about 20 years, and I also think it's dumb luck that I fell into editing this book, his final book of poetry called Homing. Don and I worked together using something that was relatively new at the time, cloud-based technology, where we were going back and forth on a document instead of the old-fashioned email. And we edited this book over the course of the 2014-2015 school year. That is the one redeeming thing that happened to me that school year. That was a really, really bad school year. Oh boy, a lot of stuff happened. Anyway, but I imagine that a lot of people who would be reading tonight from Don's work would be reading some of his major poems. So I thought I would focus on something else. As I worked on the book Homing, I noticed, and no one's ever really argued against me, including Gene Fent, when I said this at a couple of readings. But my theory about Don Welch's poetry is that his best poems, some of the major works, The Hawk, The Marginalist, Funeral at Annesley, on and on and on, came in the first half of his writing career. But the second half of his writing career, not that the good writing wasn't there, the best books came in the second half of the writing career, of his writing career. And one book so if you disagree with that, please feel free to argue with me, that's fine. One book that I am very, very fond of for a number of reasons is this book, Gnomes, that I know we have some free copies of here tonight. Please feel free to take one, and it is definitely worth your time. And even if it were on sale for whatever the list price is, it's not listed, I think it'd be worth a lot of money. I helped edit this book the first time, and it had a long, tortured publishing history. It went to China, it went to Texas, and all kinds of places, and it came out. It is really, really worth your time. And this is Don said we tend to write the poems that we like to read. And I like to read the really short, maybe a little longer than a haiku, but not quite as long as, Paradise Lost. Somewhere in between those two. But I really like this book of poetry, and if you take this home, I virtually guarantee you will like it too. So we put some excerpts. I would have liked to put the whole book in to Homing, but obviously for reasons of space we could not. So I'd like to read to you this excerpts from Gnomes that are in the book, and if you have the book with you, it's on page 272. I'm a teacher also, right? Instead of a mean look, right, I just have the smiling sarcasm, and that works to keep seniors in line. Okay, this is from Gnomes. Okay, so these are very short little snippets, and so I'll try to pause in between each one. After writing this brief, I want to walk under eaves where the icicles are coming apart and the lights harp music of colors. This morning the hawk of perhaps is flying in case of, for maybe, for the possibility of, in an air almost alive with forever, toward a plausible dove. That was hard to write. That was really hard. Two tire tracks leading into the distance, far away toward the purple hills, the green weeds in their center once, a bundle between a boy and girl. If history is a series of rivers, why do you write about what's on this bank? Notice the way the water interests itself in your feet. If poetry ennobles, why does it move so few? Even the light appeals to every blunt head in the garden. Silence is windless, yet it has an edge. It can peal without a bell. It can oppress without a cloud, and sound though no one speaks it. Tonight it stands here, framed as if it were a door. Standing on one leg, the cranes are entering their dreams, in which something says snow, white feathers, something says wing. I like this next one a lot. For him, it was 15 thrusts. For her, uninterrupted touch. Midnight in the ballpark of how much? When Socrates asked, "What is justice?" wasn't the light on the calloused hackberry the same on the weeping willow? On the mantle, the yellow eye of our candle burns space. Evening comes close, a moth down flapping, not glowing. Consider those like prepositions. Their almost thoughtless walking, their flights without birds, the rivulets of their minutes, their little bridges towards. In death our flesh goes dark, but what of that otherness which sparks? About your drawing, this is the way to worship with a pencil. The lines a mind makes married to a hand. This is the way a hand holds within itself a head, each small mark drawing from itself the very thing it is. That night when I went looking for you beneath the street lights, all I found was yellow shatter. Over the years, the water in this canal has left an inch of sand. And you, what drifts do you have in your word bed? You say it's necessary to be dying. I say, in time. Better the motion of your jasmine than the raw side of this noon. Every time I love you, I bring the future into the present. This is a great way to end this little section. Thank you all for coming. Having lost almost everything I am going to lose, I sit here embracing my freedom. The waves in this tail race couldn't be clearer. Today, there are no better goodbyes. Only somebody who did his doctoral dissertation on Thoreau could say something like, having lost almost everything I am going to lose, I sit here embracing my freedom. That's great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dwayne. Smiling sarcasm does work. It's also quite a gift. You have to learn to wield that effectively and carefully. That's true. Another friend that has inhabited this stage and many others, I saw her and Lucy just a few nights ago, it seems like, downtown doing another reading, and then in Omaha a month ago doing another reading, and then also organizing workshops and seminars. All that is something that's sparked by just the magic that shows up with Bill Kloefkorn and Don Welch in our state, and teaching and giving us the really good example of how to be a community in yourself and let that spread out all across the land. So, Marge, come up and let us know what's going on.
Hi, everybody. I'll read two poems, one of Bill's and one of Don Welch's. Oh, it's my chance also to say that I handed out a thing for August 10 when Lucy and I are giving a presentation for the Nebraska Humanities. If I didn't give you one, and it's here in Lincoln. If I didn't give you one and you want one, but the thing is, it has the right date, August 10, but it calls it a Wednesday when actually it's a Thursday, and so you don't know whether to come Wednesday or Thursday. Well, it's Thursday, but
Thursday's a good day.
August 10. So, hard to pick, isn't it? I know, I'm not the only person in the room that says it's very hard to pick. I'd like to read, I have a lot of favorites, but here's one. This is Don Welch, When Memory Gives Dust a Face. When dust like flour sifted the road, and weeds were skeletal corsages, when horses broke their hooves unshod, with careless grass their only forage, she sang high songs, and we listened as we walked to town. No voice was more enriched by pain. Her tongue cleaved to love to make it new. In loss, the dove had been sung to. So now I really do have to decide which one of these to read. I didn't know I was going to be up, so I kept just thinking it would come to me. I wanted to read the one where Galen disappears. But I guess I'll read something that I can find.
Sorry, it's not something.
Get closer. Is that it? Okay. Well, I'll read from Bill Kloefkorn the poem about the teacher looking at the students. My love for all things warm and breathing. I have seldom loved more than one thing at a time. Yet this morning I feel myself expanding, each part of me soft and glandular, and under my skin is room enough now for the loving of many things, and all of them at once. These students especially, not only the girl in the yellow sweater whose name, Laura Buxton, is somehow the girl herself. Laura for the coy green mellowing eyes, Buxton for all the rest. But also the simple girl in blue in the back row, her mouth sad beyond all reasonable inducements. And the boy with the weight problem, his teeth at work even now on his lower lip, and the grand profusion of hair and nails and hands and legs and tongues and thighs and fingertips and wrists and throats, yes, of throats especially. Throats through which passes the breath that joins the air that enters through these ancient windows, that exits, that takes with it my own breath inside this room just now, my love for all things warm and breathing, that lifts it high to scatter it fine and enormous into the trees and grass, into the heat, beneath the earth, beneath the stone, into the boundless lust of all things bound but gathering.
Well, that is one of my favorite poems of Bill's. Marvelous piece. And with another note here about Bill Kloefkorn, Char Neely talked to me earlier, and she had found a copy of a periodical from back in probably 20 years ago from North Dakota. And she was reading through there and saw some poems and wondered who in the world might have written these poems. I wonder who that might be. So, Char, come up and tell us something about that story. We like stories. Char Neely.
Well, it's all my daughter's fault. She told me I had to clean out my bookshelf so she didn't have to do it later. So I was sitting there saying, no, I can't throw this book away. No, not this one, you know, I can't give this away. And I came to this one and I thought, I don't even remember it. So, as usual, I start at the back of a book of poetry and work my way forward. And if I ever did that with this book, I didn't get to the table of contents. Because on the table of contents, on the second page of it, my fingers work, or the third page, is the start of a poem. It's finished on the next page. Well, all except for one word. There's a blank line he was going to fill in later. And as I read it, I thought, oh, you know how that feeling comes over you and you just hear a certain voice with a poem? I could hear that voice and I thought, okay, this has to be a Kloefkorn poem. Well, got to the second page and it talks about delivering the beacon and World War II. And I'm sitting there going, oh yeah, they'll always connected those two. So tonight I finally got confirmation from the family, it is his. And Rex remembers seeing him write in this book.
And that's written in by hand.
Yes, it is his hand. So, which I did decipher, but.
That's pretty good.
And I forgot my glasses, so I got run through it.
More decipher.
Yeah.
Yes, I think this is on the keep list. She's going to be mad because there's more on that list. But anyhow, this is what I found. It's called An Even Dozen from the Book of Birthdays. One more week, my mother tells me, and you'll be an even dozen. In anticipating a gift commensurate with what I surely deserve, I worked most of this day at being productive, weeding my victory gardens. It is a small but intense commitment. 2 rows of beans, 2 of peas, 1 of lettuce, 1 of radishes, 3 of onions, 4 tomato plants, 4 mounds of cucumbers. Precisely how this garden might bring victory, I don't understand. But faith, says the overweight preacher, with a wen on his forehead, is fill in the blank. By sundown, my garden lies beautifully tended, not so much as a single weed among the green and ripening growth, with water from a long black snake of hose. I darken the soil. I reaffirm my commitment. I sing. Somehow, it works. The following evening, I am astride my bicycle, delivering the beacon, announcing to each subscriber that my victory garden, in its quaint, mysterious way, has pulled what surely must amount eventually to victory. An atomic bomb, little boy, has been dropped on Hiroshima, detonated at a height of creating what our President Truman calls a reign of ruin. Man, woman, and child, and so on and so on. Now, in less than a week, I tell myself, I'll be an even dozen. I therefore oversee my garden as if the universe makes sense. So red the tomatoes, so green the peas, so justifiable the human connection between thee and me. And I don't know if that's a final version, but the version I wrote.
This is where you all get to talk together without interruption for about 5 or 6 minutes or 10 minutes, somewhere in there. We're going to take a break, get up, get something else to drink, take a look at the menu, have fun. There are people here that you may not know. If you see someone that you don't know, say hi and get to know them. That's what we do here. Be back in 5 minutes.
Against the shag bark of a cottonwood, we tie Virginia May. Tie her standing in her short plaid skirt against the trunk of that massive tree. Its cotton lighter almost than air, drifting slowly westward, urged by an easy breeze toward a huge ball of sun not far from setting. We fit the blindfold, a tea towel over her eyes, and around her yellow hair, as if a low-slung headband. She is crying. Should we build a fire? One by one, we retreat to gallop toward her, one hand clutching invisible reins, the other as if a quirt whipping the thigh. One by one, we come to a sudden halt to lift her skirt. Each sound we make then, like the animal we stand amazed to recognize inside us, baying, "Oh, Virginia May." Night is the towel we cannot finally help but wear, and in our dark little souls lie dying. And late at night, under a bondage of homemade quilts, I lie half asleep, half awake. In my hand, the red-hot iron pressing itself into the flesh of anything. Garage, granary, barn, hen house, my closest friend, sizzle and stench, the brand as if my own initials, making all things mine. Wanting wetness, I begin to moan. Glossolalia, only the true apostle can decipher, until, when I have spoken long enough, not quite to expect it, her body, cool as cream, splashes against me. Moan into cry, into howl. I crouched that early evening, dumbfounded to utter, cord and blindfold, meanwhile, holding bud nipple, lip twist, joystick, skin, willing to receive, to return the brand. It means possession, world without end, until whatever happens, happens. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I heard Bill read that at a small reading probably 25 years ago, something like that. He said that is a poem that you need to put inside yourself and then measure and see where you fit with that and find what you can do to become something possibly other than that. That's the way to go with that. Thanks. Did I miss somebody back at that table? Terry Lee?
Anita?
Anita. Okay, I said Angie. I wrote your name down wrong. Okay, Anita.
Sorry about that. Oh, no worries at all. Terry Lee and I took a lot of sim classes together. In fact, I think almost all of them. But to go with your grandfather, just until tonight when I was wading through the books that he had, I have a lot of these, and I was just looking through my favorite one, and I thought, I have not seen this poem, The Irrigator, before. I don't remember it. And one of the poems that I wrote in one of Don's classes was called Irrigating with Grandpa. And it was a poem that got all his little stars. You know, you always felt really cool when you got stars on your poems and you got comments. And I thought, holy crap, how did I miss the poem The Irrigator? Because I grew up irrigating with my grandpa at 5 years old, when you still had to put tubes in the rows and gated pipe, no pivots, so you could just push a button. So anyway, I just found, you said those found poems. This is one of those for me tonight. And it's just simply titled The Irrigator. Look, these old furrows are ruts. Dry lines run down their hard centers, and somewhere the water pools listening. All along the canals, the gates wait, old gates, their boards cracked with dry cold. Old screws, brittle lipped by the sun. Let water come, water more sacred than the gifts of the Magi, water which will quicken the corn's sleeping germ. It is water which will make this land rich. It is irrigation which will turn our dry lives around. In the mouths of water are so many silent, free songs. And then I love Don's poem, Poet in Residence at a Country School, because he tells so many cool stories about it all the time. And I was at Wesleyan for 1 year, went from a nursing major to an English major, and then I married a farmer, so I moved back home, south of Kearney. And I did not meet Bill Kloefkorn until I took classes with Don Welch. I'm like, damn, I just missed him at Wesleyan. You know, I could have taken a class with him. And so most of you know, really great poets are also fantabulous teachers. And so this book, A Man in Love with the Wind, has Don's poems that are commented on by poets. And so Bill comments on this poem by Don. So it's a teacher commenting on another poem by a really great teacher, and two also really great poets, because I love Bill Kloefkorn too. So what Bill writes is, Poet in Residence at a Country School is a gem. It is a wonderfully religious poem because it brings people together while avoiding the trappings of denominational nationalism. It's a hard word. And all of the language is splendidly appropriate to the tone and to the subject. I enter the school, sucking apples of wind. Later, as the youngsters work at their poems, Welch describes their wrists as being green and alive. In the first few lines of the poem, Welch is a participant. Then, in the middle section, he becomes the teacher. Finally, at the end of the poem, he returns to the role of participant, thanks to the boy who says he can't think of a better place. Ironically, he finds perhaps the best place of all, the poet's lap. And this in turn gives the teacher, the poet, his place too, and thus becomes a part of the group, a participant in his own assignment. I have read this poem too and with hundreds of students, and always it hits the mark. It is Don Welch at his unassuming best. And we've all been in the laps of great poets here, both as teachers and poets. So this is another instance of what a great teacher he was. Poet in Residence at a Country School. The school greets me like a series of sentence fragments sent out to recess. Before I hit the front door and into a game of baseball soccer. My first kick's a foul, my second sails over the heads of the outfielders. Rounding third base, I suck in my stomach and dodge the throw of a small blue-eyed boy. I enter the school sucking apples of wind. In the 5th grade section of the room, I stand in the center of an old rug and ask, where would you go where no one could find you? A secret place where you'd be invisible to everyone except yourselves. What would you do there? What would you say? I ask them to imagine they're there and writing a poem. As I walk around the room, I look at the wrists of the kids, green and alive, careful with silence. They are writing themselves into fallen elms, corners of barns, washouts, and alkali flats. I watch until a tiny boy approaches, who says he can't think of a place, who wonders today, at least, if he could just sit on my lap. Tomorrow, he says, he'll write. And so the two of us sit under a clock beside a gaudy picture of a butterfly and a sweet poem of Christina Rossetti's. And in all of that silence, neither of us can imagine where he'd rather be.
Thank you, Anita. Roy Shield, do you have something to read, sir? Roy Shield, one of our representatives from the Doane College area, down around South Street in Lincoln.
Yes.
One of my good friends. Roy Shield.
We begin with a, excuse me here. Is that good?
Good.
Is that all right? Poem from Alvin Turner as Farmer by Bill Kloefkorn. At the sink, Martha out-hustles the dusk, bending herself to the washing of lamp chimneys. I have never seen a woman so quick, so deft. Within a porcelain pan of suds, she turns the smoke-dark glass, lifting it at last into the dry, bright rub of dish towels. And I am struck with the crisp, clean motion of it all, with how it happened so concordantly. At the stroke of dark, the fitting of one new chimney to each new flame, and our settling into nightfall like globes of glass, no thicker than a shim. When I read a poem of Bill's, I'm almost always astonished at how he can bring in words from different disciplines and have them fit perfectly with whatever the common vocabulary is that he's using. Don Welch and I, back in the, I think in the 90s sometime, spent a lot of time exchanging letters, maybe when we should have been students, I'm not sure. Letters about versification and metrics and so forth. And this poem that I'm going to read now by Don is metrical, but he's able to almost disguise it. For instance, it's called Listening to a Seventh Grader Read Robert Frost. And so the first line is, read so young with big sky eyes. That's read, R-E-E-D. But if you scan that metrically, although if you get people who do metrical stuff, you get some real arguments there, and it always ends up in a best 2 out of 3 arm wrestling contest. Read so young with big sky eyes. So metrically, it's like that. Well, now when you get down to the third line of that stanza, the quicksilver of your mouth's surprise. And so you've got a lot of stuff going on there. And here in the second stanza, he talks about R. Frost's choosings. Okay? When you hear that read, that's O-U-R, Frost's musings, or choosings. And so his poetry is full of those delightful kinds of things. So listening to a 7th grader read Robert Frost. Read so young with big sky eyes and knees like bell-bong clappers. The quicksilver of your mouth's surprise runs o'er-veined through the matter of pasture springs and snowy woods, leaves of our Frost's choosings. You thank the poems with an assent to bell-tongue Robert's musings. So go with the grace of his old fingers, swing his song to earthward. Dare the dancing of a singer whose notes as rare as you are. Of course, there's a bunch of Frost poems talked about there, and especially one of the great love poems in English, To Earthward. Thank you.
We've got 2 more writers. We have Michelle from Omaha and Terry from Lincoln. So, Michelle, please come up and help us out.
Hello. Hi. I'm a friend of Rex's. So he sent me an invitation on Facebook and I had to come. Bill Kloefkorn was a person that I was able to interview when I was going to school at Southeast Community College. I was taking poetry, and my instructor said, hey, I know Bill, do you want to sit down and meet with him? Because I had written some reader responses on Bill's book, Houses and Beyond, and his poem Rushing Season. And I had picked up that book on a table randomly where my instructor spread them out and said, you know, pick out any book. We just need to write a read response today. There wasn't much planned for the day, as poetry teachers can be kind of rolling with it on some days. So I picked up this book. I didn't know who Bill Kloefkorn was at all. I opened up the book and I opened it up to Rushing the Season. So, Tegan, I felt myself go back to places in western Nebraska that I've never been. Excuse me. I thought I would have it together up here.
You're doing fine.
And I left it. And you'll see, as Bill writes about his grandmother, and I swear I was there. And I know he wrote this poem about in Kansas, but the prairie goes to through us all. Okay. So, and I really appreciated when Aaron said, or I'm sorry, when Adrian said, you read the poems you wish you had written. And I sure wish I had written this one. Okay, so Rushing the Season. Early March, grandmother, rushing the season, wants to see for herself again her burial plot. Did its boundaries come through the winter intact? Are the names on the grave to white granite missing? And one more time again, in my green Ford coupe, I take her. I don't want to. Jesus, grandmother, what's the point? I think, thank God, there's no one here to watch us. Me beside my green Ford coupe, one hand smooth against the swelled protective layer of liquid wax. Grandmother in her wide, rosy beige coat, placing a potted geranium just this side of the headstone. When she bends over, I can see where her brown cotton hose end and the flesh of her white, heavy German thighs begins. Christ, if there was anybody here, wouldn't it be embarrassing? But it's too early for the buffalo grass, too early for the new lime growth that will mark another milestone on the limbs of young cedars. Too soon even for a fresh start of leaves on the Chinese elms. Just me, grandmother, Anna, rushing the season, placing a geranium above where grandfather already is. Where grandmother is, she'll tell me later. About to be. There is always, in spite of the sunshine, a bone-chilling wind bearing down from the north, and always I am freezing my ass to death in my shirt sleeves. Grandmother, satisfied at last with the tilt of the geranium, straightens herself, stands with her short arms folded, as if to memorize again the underside as well as the top. So good. Takes me back to western Nebraska with my own grandmother, doing the very same thing in cemeteries where our families lie. So the other one is Albert Turner's Farmer. It's very, very short. It's right, follows the 23rd poem. I'm sure everybody is familiar with this. But I had a chance to talk with a one-on-one interview for about an hour with Bill Kloefkorn as a student, and boy, did I feel special. He was so down to earth. I bought his coffee, and he encouraged me to keep writing and was just very inspirational. So, like I said, I'm sure you'll recognize this one. I stand alone at the foot of my father's grave, trembling to tell. The door of the granary is open, sir, and someone lost the bucket to the well.
It's that kind of impact, because that's what happens when you really find a fine teacher. Sometimes you don't realize that, till way down the road, and you have some other basis of comparison show up that just don't measure. And you say, well, I should have paid more attention, or I should go back to read, or I should start thinking maybe a little harder about writing something myself. That's a good plan. We always end up the reading part of the night with our friend Terrence Oberst. We call him our Pastor Terry. One of the things that Bill used to do for some of the music events around here, I remember one time they had a Prairie Dog Spectacular up on the 4th floor above the mill. Lots of music. Lucy, your name is in there too. And we had Terry. You're going to read a poem quick, but Lucy's going to read now. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'll get spanked later.
Thank you. I'm just going to read one poem. I was never lucky enough to be a student of Bill Kloefkorn, but like many people, I feel very influenced by him, very inspired by him. I had been gone from Nebraska a long time, and I had been gone from poetry a long time. And I came back and I went to the library, and one of the books I picked up was this one, Alvin Turner as Farmer. As many of you know, a number of persona poems written in the voice of Alvin Turner, a dirt farmer who dreams himself a poet. And I love these poems. The poem I'm going to read, actually it's one I think I read last year, but I can't help it. I'm going to read it again. This is poem number 11, if you're following along in your hymnals. This morning I am dizzy with the plump brown evidence of fall. The granary is full. The bucket at the cistern glints its use. The baby is solid as a tractor lug. In the kitchen, Martha grows fuller than her cook stove's fire. I want a dozen pancakes, ma'am, a ton of sausage, half a crate of eggs, some oatmeal, and a loaf of toast. Feed me, woman, then kindly step back. I intend to do some pretty damn fancy whistling while I slop the hogs. Thank you.
Sorry. Now we will have Pastor Terry do what Bill did at many music emporiums and extravaganzas. He would get up and write a poem, read a poem for us all. Kind of sometimes it'd be a benediction poem, sometimes it'd be opening up the evening. And so I think the last time that he was supposed to have made it to that, he wasn't too well. And so they let me read that poem for them at that event. That was spectacular. That was John's doing. And I sure appreciated that. And that still resonates today. Now Terry will come up and resonate a few more of Bill Kloefkorn poems. Pastor Terry.
Friends, okay, if I read the analogy?
Yeah.
Thank you. I never had the privilege of meeting Don, but Bill joined our workshop several times, And my most vivid memory of Bill was when somebody in the workshop asked him, what made a good poem? And Bill, the consummate teacher he was, walked up to the blackboard and wrote on the blackboard, McLeish's dictum, a poem should not mean but be. So I'm going to read my elegy for Bill, just to set it up a little bit. There are some allusions between Virgil's Aeneid and Bill's creative life. Of course, Aeneas survived the Trojan War and was the founder of Rome. And there are two words in it, Latin words, moles, which means heavy undertaking or task, and a pivotal word called pietas, which is duty owed to someone whose duty is owed to. So, here we go. It's on the death of William Kloefkorn. I heard of your sad demise from a phone call, an old friend in the early morning, right before I left to go swimming at the YM. You joined our workshop some 3 years ago, robust and seeming so youthful, patient and kind, speaking with the authority of being a well-seasoned poet, critiquing our individual works through the spectrum of 60 years of evoking poetry like magic in the air. And as I swam, I called to mind certain parallels between Virgil's Aeneid and your corpus. How Aeneas founded Rome through a great molus, a heavy task or difficult burden, while your molus was compiling the compendium of a select poems, nearly 500 pages of sheer lyrical beauty. I remember that last public readings from 5 months ago in the basement of the University of Nebraska bookstore. There were 20 or so of us attending this christening of the selected poems. Your voice was still vibrant, but to use that old biblical cliche, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. I helped to change your oxygen tank as you graciously signed my book. I whispered, please, Bill, get well so you can join us again. And you managed to smile. Hadn't lost your sense of humor, however self-deprecating as usual. Quoting your publisher, continue in a tongue-in-cheek way, we can't publish it if it's over 500 pages. I thought, what a hoot. This old guy still has some kick in the ass left yet. Now my mind drifts back to the Aeneid, where Aeneas journeys to the underworld to visit the ghost of his father Anchises, who counsels the would-be Romans, to spare the defeated submissive and battle down the proud. And isn't this what you've done in all of your poetic personas? Stand up for the proverbial little guy, whether Looney or Ludi Jr. or Stocker, or to bring to closure with, little peckerhead, he said, prove it, prove it, prove it, prove it, prove it. Those who have no other voice than the one you've given them. Finally, Aeneas is distinguished for his pietas, one's duty and proper behavior toward all those to whom duty is owed. His as a leader, a father, a son, and a founder of a new people. Yours, crowned with the Nebraska State Poet for over 30 years. How Aeneas and you somehow blend together, not really able to tell one apart from the other. His pietas becoming your pietas. The pietas we all owe you, dearest Bill. The pietas we still owe. Thank you. And now to my function as Pastor Terry to read a poem by Bill and on two short poems by Don. Let me find it here. This is appropriately called August. I'm not old, but old enough to believe I know what Jimmy Stevens wants when he invites my sister into his Model A. And because I believe I know where he is going, I follow the car afoot, breathing dust and exhaust until both have left me. So far behind, I must rely on what I believe I know to get me to where I believe they are going. But I am wrong. They aren't here, meaning that wherever they are, I cannot find them, meaning that wherever they might be doing, I cannot know, cannot put my small, helpless body between them. For a long time, I sit in the weeds at the side of the road, that failed me, inhaling dryness, looking up and into the brilliance of unaccountable stars. August, the month of my birth. I'm alone and not alone. Long beams and moonlight hanging from the limbs of the kapalas. Coyotes with their howling, saying something I believe just now I understand. For a long time I sit in weeds, somewhere between those most mysterious cousins, knowing and belief. My sister somewhere in a Model A, saying what I cannot hear, touching what I cannot reach. There are many small rocks in the road, far too many to count, reflecting the moon rays. My plan is this, to choose one of them to kick all the way back to the farmhouse, to save it then to remember how plentiful this night was, to wash it and wash it to give as a gift to my sister, how remarkably empty. Just two short poems by Don. I too love the alley poems. And my favorite book by Don is Travels. So I'm going to read one from each. This is called, and this wasn't done, I'm glad. This is called Among the Poor. Whoever talks philosophy in their alleys is drunk on the elixir of big words. Like gravel, what love is what love does. Tough enough to keep weeds down, hard enough to suffer suns. It has a look beneath them. But that's not true. They need the dump and truck of love to walk on too. And finish off things here with find that our poem here. Okay, this is, I think, my favorite Don Welch poem. It's from Travels. It's called When That Snow Died, Harmon Park, Nebraska. That night when the snow fell, there were so many white voices, each with a newness of genius, each an elf flake on your lashes. Young, how could we have known that the cold could be more than Siberian, or that in the heart of the snow there was an inaudible weeping? How I loved you, your face turned upward, freckled with white. How I loved you when a million white words were making sense of that lawn. It was like this, when that snow died, lace burned. Thank you. And thank you, Bill and Don.
The only way to send it off is with some music. We'll get the youth and the energy of Jake, and then we have his dad coming up here to hit the banjo. Did you bring a banjo? No, he didn't. We'll try a mandolin. So some music, and then we'll be on our way, and you can kind of put this into your heart and into your head and think about it and wonder about it and maybe even write something or think, I can read something out loud, or I can memorize something, and then I'll be up there reading it, and all of a sudden I'll be struck by the fact that this poem is about me rather than about someone else. Good pieces of music are that way too. Come on up, Jake.
All right, thank you. I think it's just gonna be really, I think it's just sit back on this one. Thank all of you for coming out. Everybody will be good. Check, check. There we go. Well, thank all of you for coming out. It's been a great evening, full of good writing and literature. Anyway, I'm going to do a slow one, then I'll finish off with a faster one, a little more upbeat. But this one's titled Nobody's Man. like a time bomb. Nowhere to go, nowhere to stay. Double shots of Jack keeping you away. So light up the fire and get ready for a good time. Hiding with the crowd, dancing the nightlife. I'm here for the moment, but I'm gone with the sunset. Rambling around, dust in the wind. Forever alone to fight and dance with the moonlight. Nobody's man, so I really am. To beat on back for another round, chased on down with a shot of crown. Letting it burn like a memory, grabbing hold of me. I can't tell if it's you or the whiskey. Got the radio up, the windows down, chasing a storm south of my small town. Fireflies dancing in the ditches as the wind blows in, flashing with the lightning, going back in time to you and I, and stars and lights and spinning tires down the mud road. Now I got a 6-string riding in my shotgun seat, chasing us again, it's killing me. I'm here for the moment, but I'm gone with the sunset, rambling around with the dust and the wind. Forever alone, fighting and dancing with the moonlight. Nobody's man, so I really am. We outran the world on summer nights. I was yours and you were mine. Now I tip it on back, shooting 2 at a time, try to bury it on the eye. Because I'm here for the moment, but I'm gone with the sunset, rambling around with the dust and the wind. Forever alone, fighting, dancing with the moonlight. Nobody's man, so I really am. To beat on back for another round, chasing on down with a shot of crown. Letting it burn like a memory, grabbing hold of me. I can't tell if it's you or the whiskey. I'm here for the moment, but I'm gone with the sunset, rambling around with the dust and the wind. Forever alone to find an answer with the moonlight. Nobody's man, who I really am. All right, we'll go ahead and I forgot the words to this one earlier, so.
Came back.
They came back to me. They came back. So here we go. Hopefully I don't forget them halfway through the song.
Don't worry about it.
Past, looking more toward the future that's made in the moment. Riding with the lines only time can ride. We're dancing the high of the stage lights, living out loud till we're feeling right. In the background, in the back row of a whiskey tipsy sunburned stampede view. This ain't no Luke Bryan spring break, but you get me high anyway. You took it out of pocket, put a hook in my heart and set the bar deep. This ain't no Sundance City, you're looking postcard pretty. Yeah, and it's a sure thing when that sun sinks, you'll be right here with me. There ain't no sand on this beach, just pond clay beneath our feet. It ain't no Luke Bryan set my sights on you since you walked in this room. So just cut me some slack, take my hand, have these things. We can roll all night, and if you don't want to go back, we can set this night on fire like the sky above these T-town tracks. Say no to Brian spring break, you get me high anyway. You took it out, walk, look at my heart and set the ball deep. This ain't no something city, you're looking postcard pretty. Yeah, and this is your thing when that sun sinks. You'll be right here with me. There ain't no sand on this beach, just pond beneath our feet. Ain't no Luke Bryan spring break, just a country kid's getaway. Oh, it's country kid's getaway. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Another one or one more? One more? All right, let's see.
I gotta decide. Let's see here. We'll do one here. This one I like to play quite a bit. This one's Tangled in the Chains. It goes along with Nobody's Man. So I figure it'll be a good one to finish out the night with here. Here we go. Here's Tangled in the Chains. Fingers tangled in a chain across, hanging from my left hand, sending moonlight off the ways. Mine's tangled on your thought. One night, two hearts, bumping through the dark like a 4-count love song. Searching for a night gone, let for fate to carry on. Let's beat it to the light and give it one more night. Tangled in each other's arms. Nobody's man, but I'm living for a dream. Chasing the night, locked in a coma with a 6-string hit. Sunk went across on a chain. Road paved red, it's one worth of blood and pain. Now you're walking through the dark, through the shadows of my heart, breaking walls and striking flames like an angel from above. See my heart lifted up from being tangled in the chain. Saving grace, give me zero cause pretty face, bare feet about the window, free falling from the stars to the light. The song gives light today. Summer skin stained in the moon glow, chasing the night wherever love goes. Cross hanging from the rear view, sending a memory over me and you. Nobody's man, but I'm living for a dream. Chasing the night, locked in a coma with a 6-string hit. Sunk went across on a chain. Road paved red is one worth of blood and pain. dark through the shadows of my heart. Breaking walls and striking flames like an angel from above. See my heart lit up from being tangled in the chains. Locked in the coma with a six-string head, sunk away in a cross on a chain, but a road paved red is warm with blood and pain. Now you walk through the dark, the shadows of my heart, breaking walls and striking flames like an angel from above. See my heart lifted up from being tangled in the chains. Crossing from the left hand, sending moonlight off the waves. Mine's tangled on your thought. One night, two hearts bumping through the dark. And I don't need no saving grace, just keep me tangled from the chains. Thank you guys again for coming out, and hope you all had as good a night as I did. So I'm sure you did. All right, anyway,
What can I say in 30 seconds? Not much. The point is, community, the point is, from some of the things that Kale mentioned in the beginning that she puts up on her father's page every day, some of his short, pithy comments. You know, writing is like love. It has to be an active verb. You know, love is not love until it's given away, and writing is not writing until you do that and you give it to someone, whether you get up and read it, you tell it, you send it to them in a letter, on an email, you find it, you mark it on the side of the building, whatever you might do. It'll make you cry, it'll make you laugh. We've had some mistakes tonight. Mistakes are a part of it. There'll be a good editor that'll come in and fix this program. We know that. And there'll be a good editor that gets that book out in time so that that reader can show up in September and read her new book. I wish all of you the best. I wish you a good night.